So the third question is, do you transcribe music? Do you think it's important for learning?
Transcriptions are important, and I have my students do it, and I wish I'd done it when I was younger. I never did. I always tried learning by ear. And when I see something written down, I go, oh, yeah, that explains a lot. But again, that takes me back to the Elvin thing. Like the John Riley Beyond Bop Drumming book has some great transcriptions of Elvin. It really breaks it down, and it's wonderfully instructive. And I purposefully don't spend too much time with it. I've always tried to do that stuff by ear, and that's it's kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit like the mystery of love to me, you know. You can't try to figure it out too much. That's the beauty of it. You don't understand why it works the way it does. And there may be scientific explanations, but that's not romantic. And so somehow, like the Elvin thing or certain other drummers, it's just, I love the fact that I can't figure it out. But that they created it, and it gives me something to work towards, but I'll never quite get it. And so it remains always very interesting to try to get just a little bit closer.
I see.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't want it all laid out for me. But you know, as a teacher, I see the value of it, and I learn a lot from when my students, or when I help my students at the University of Southern California do some of this stuff. But even though I require it of my students, because our jazz department requires it, I've never spent that much time or energy doing it myself.
I see. When I was, before I go to the US, I went to Berkeley to learn the drums. But before that, I can't find a very proper teacher in Hong Kong to do that. So I was trying to do transcription because I don't know what it is. And so after years, I graduated from Berkeley, and then I realized what I wrote down was totally funny stuff. And then I thought of that too. It's a great process for me to really put those things in mind, but does it really matter writing it down? Doesn't. It's like a process of it.
Well, what you bring up is an interesting point, because though there will be a transcription that will try to accurately notate a rhythm. Let's say it's on a recorded performance. And when I look at the transcription, I'll laugh because it'll be a very complex rhythmic thing, and I'll say, you know, it's just some triplets that Elvin rushed. You know, I mean, he just, so you have to sort of try to balance it with what was the intention, what's actually going on. You know, our drummers thinking of 5/4, and I see a lot of rhythmic studies where it has these kind of very complex rhythmic notations and mathematical kind of stuff. And, you know, most musicians I know don't think that way. And I can tell you this: if you know you want to be a professional musician, and this is a sight reading example or exercise that I have all my students do, especially when they're auditioning. I find the simplest snare drum exercise, like maybe the Podemsky snare drum method. Page, I can't remember if it's page 25 or 32 or 35. Anyway, it's a simple quarter note and eighth notes in 2/4 time. Bum 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 bum. Stuff like that. When I was a freshman in college, my teacher told me to open up the book to that page. I did. And I thought, easy. And he said, okay. He said, each of those is a measure. So I'd have to Stuff like that. So by the time I got to the second line, I was making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So he waved me to stop, took a puff on his cigar. He said, I want you to come back next week, be able to play that or anything else in the book at that tempo. I said, I'll get out. That was my lesson. I got kicked out. And so I learned to read because I practiced. And sight reading is about being able to scan ahead. And it's not about reading quintuplets or septuplets or this over that kind of stuff. Mm. Something like the Black Page, for example. If you're going to play the music of Frank Zappa, you might run into it. But otherwise, the everyday stuff, and I've been playing drums professionally for a lot of years, it's all quarter notes, eighth notes, occasional sixteenths or triplets. But you need to be able to instantly recognize what a rhythm is, or any combination. Mm-hmm. And not everyone's going to write rhythms the same way. So everyone should get the Louis Bellson 4/4 reading manual, which is very basic rhythms, but written in a number of different ways. And you just spend time reading. And I do a thing with my students where it's kind of like I call it like a checksum, where you go to the end of the bar and read backwards. So when I'm sight reading, and if there's a rhythm where it's preceded by rests, mm-hmm. you don't have time to count the rests. But if I go to the end of the bar and go backwards, I see, that's and a 3. There's a bunch of junk before it. So I don't get confused. So you do this enough, you recognize it's just like reading the headline of a newspaper. But that's the kind of work that most of us do. Whether you're playing in the studios of any major city or you're playing a piece of music in a band with friends. So the ultra complicated stuff, it's fun, but it's really being able to do the basic things well, mm-hmm. that counts. The other stuff's like, I don't know, you can't think of anything else to teach, I think.
This is actually very wonderful ideas.
Excuse me.
For a lot of Hong Kong students to hear that. Thanks for sharing this.
It's being able to do the basic things well. Mm-hmm. The complicated stuff that's fine, but it's for extra credit.